Hello and welcome back to CEO.CA's Inside the Boardroom. My name is James Fathom, and today I'm joined by Thomas Abraham James, CEO, President and Co-Founder of Pulsar Helium. Tom, it's great to see you today.
Thank you very much for having me, James.
So let's kick things off with a quick elevator pitch. Can you give us the company overview for Pulsar?
Certainly. So Pulsar Helium Inc., as the name suggests, a dedicated helium exploration and development company. We are registered in Canada on a TSXV under the ticker PLSR. We're also on the OTCQB with the ticker PSRHF. So we have our projects in Minnesota, the Topaz project, which is our flagship project, and then also another one in Greenland, which is the Tunu project. We're going to focus most likely on the Topaz project today, and so that one really is we're the first mover in Minnesota. Really, if you look at the hot spots for helium in the United States and Canada, it's certainly elsewhere. But what we've come by there is really, what appears to be quite a large system there. It's certainly very high concentration. So that's our focus, is getting that one moving as quickly as possible and realizing its production potential. And then meanwhile, Greenland's at a slightly earlier stage, but nevertheless a very important one as well, particularly with the European Union not having many options when it comes to helium supply. The team, so myself and my colleagues, we have quite a rich history in helium. So I've been in it now myself and our technical manager and our our chairman, for the past decade in helium. So we started up the world's first dedicated helium exploration company 10 years ago, which is Helium 1. And so certainly we've seen every single aspect of the industry. But as the company, Pulsar Helium, it was really created because on the backbone of that asset in Minnesota that we became aware of. We just think it's a tremendous opportunity. And we listed in Canada via IPO in August of last year. So a young company as well.
Great. Thank you very much for that overview. Lots to talk about, and I do want to talk in a few moments about the Topaz project and some of the news coming out there. But if we could maybe for our viewers start with an overview of the helium market. A lot of investors in your precious metals, critical minerals, helium, maybe not as commonly in the forefront or as commonly well known as a commodity. Obviously, interesting time with supply and demand dynamics, National Helium Reserve shuttering fairly recently. Can you walk us through what is the current state of the helium market and what is the kind of long-term opportunity here?
Certainly. I must admit, when I first got into this industry and started speaking to potential investors and suggested to them, would you like to invest in the industrial gas space? Is one met with shock. I mean, it's got a history and sort of regarded as being one of the most boring sectors out there. However, I think helium is very much changing that. Certainly the awareness has increased in the past decade, and that's all on the back of that decade-long helium shortage. I guess you could say it was something that was neglected. It's all we hear about is party balloons, and I think it's good to get that out the way because that's about 3% of market share and a bit of a waste of a non-renewable commodity. Whereas the other 97% use is mostly biased towards the tech industry. Helium has some very unique properties. That is, it's a liquid at close to absolute zero, so negative 271 degrees Celsius. It's inert, so therefore it's non-combustible. And so it's got a lot of applications. So for superconducting magnets, MRI scanners, you need to drop the temperature as much as possible in order for that superconductivity. Liquid helium does that, and it's non-replaceable. Space rocket launch is a really big one. So when you see the gas pouring out the side of a rocket just before takeoff, chances are that's helium. And then the real big one that everyone's talking about now is semiconductor manufacturing on the back of AI. You need liquid helium for that. In terms of supply, why has it been in trouble for the past 10 years? Really because there was a standalone helium repository, only one of them, and that was the US Federal Helium Reserve. That's just been privatized, so that occurred earlier this year, so it's now in private hands. But also there's not much left. And the issue that comes with that is it was really the only flywheel in the system. So more than 95% of the world's current helium supply is as a byproduct of natural gas. That doesn't give any flexibility to the market should we need more. So with that flywheel effectively gone, Now there is no way to sort of cater for new demand or sort of short-term spot allocation. So that's something that, really where we fit in as a company, because we only look for primary helium sources, where it is not a byproduct. The other thing is that aging gas fields. So not every single natural gas field has a helium component to it either. It's not ubiquitous. So what we're seeing is in the US, which has been the world's number 1 producer of helium, is that the production is in significant decline now. So not only with the Federal Helium Reserve, but also with other sources. The US is now starting to import. And actually, it was only just this morning that I saw new import data that year on year, imports in the USA have gone up 80%, which is just a very large number. The country which has really taken over now the mantle for production is Qatar, on the back of their natural gas production. But that has some issues because it's quite displaced from the USA. Helium really doesn't like to travel. It likes to leak. So that's such a long distance, so it's problematic. And then the other one is Russia. And I don't think that North America will be seeing any Russian product anytime soon. So really, it's created this new industry, which is primary helium exploration, and certainly where we fit in.
Great. Certainly an interesting time to be in a market that's undergoing such unique supply and demand dynamics. Let's talk a bit about the Topaz project. Can you walk us through the exploration strategy? How was this project discovered and acquired? And then I guess in a few moments, we'll also talk about your latest news, but we'd love to hear about the exploration side of it first.
Yeah, sure. I think it's a wonderful story. So I became aware of it a few years ago. There was a company in Minnesota that was doing exploration for copper and nickel PGEs. So they were out there drilling, and on one particular drill hole, they hit gas, and this thing really roared, and so much so that it pushed the core out of the rock out of the drill string and shot it out into the sky like a projectile. Everybody at the drill rig was very concerned that this gas was flammable, so they all backed away from the rig, and one brave soul went up and took a number of gas samples and then sent them off to 2 different laboratories. The analysis was conducted to find out, is it flammable? It came back saying no, it's not. But very interestingly, both laboratories agreed with each other. The helium content was 10.5%. Now, this original discovery was made back in 2011, and that's really just before the world was made aware of this impending helium shortage. So I guess you could say it was neglected. It wasn't really acknowledged what that meant. We became aware of it, and then started actively pursuing the license. And it really did take quite a while. Minnesota hasn't got a history of natural gas or oil production. So negotiating the lease was, that was quite a fun process. I think everybody thought that we were mad trying to get a gas license for that area. But we got through, and certainly with our history, the credibility was there. But then I guess you could say it was a little bit cart before the horse. So we had a discovery, but not any of the lead-up data that you would typically have. So that would be, say, geophysical data, so seismic, gravity, and so on. So we've been acquiring that, and really we've started work in earnest in 2021, and then listed the company in 2023. So we had that additional supporting information to say, okay, is there enough there to suggest it's not just an isolated pocket, but it's something much larger? Probably worth mentioning too that with that original discovery, it was open for 4 days and venting that entire time without any obvious loss in pressure until they could safely go in and cement up the hole. So that one, and then we found that some 160 kilometers off to the south, there's one other well that was being drilled in Minnesota that was analyzed for helium, and that one came back at 2%. So this all gave us a great deal of confidence to start Pulsar. It's not something which is small. We think this is quite a large, high-grade system, and really to be the first mover there, incredibly exciting.
So you mentioned previously concentrations of around 10.5%, but last week you conducted flow rate testing. Can you walk us through the significance of that testing? What did you see there? And in terms of the flow rate and the concentration, are there any other projects out there that compare to what you're seeing at Topaz?
So we just, so that original discovery that I mentioned, we drilled about 15 meters away from that one. and we went down, and it's really, I guess you could regard it as a sort of proof of concept well. So in the industry, it's regarded as an appraisal well, appraising that original discovery. And so we really replicated it. We couldn't go back down the same hole because that one had been cemented. But we got down, we got to the helium-bearing zone. We then pushed a little bit deeper, and we then got helium flow back to surface, which is great because there's a few key components that you need in order for a helium occurrence to become commercially viable. One of which is concentration. And so for us, our latest results, we sent samples off to 4 different laboratories. We've got the results back from the first one, and they were saying between 8.7 and 14.5% helium. So that's wonderful because it really does confirm that high-grade nature of it. In regard to your question, are we aware of anywhere else with such high concentration? Look, on the upper end of that, not really. There's a couple of isolated occurrences that we're aware of in Africa, but certainly nothing which has been sort of developed. They seem to be relatively small in size, those higher grade occurrences. So then the gas naturally flowing up to surface. So that was a wonderful thing to really repeat from that original discovery. Because without that, then you have to start using these horrible words like fracking and so on, which nobody really wants to do. How do you stimulate the gas to come up? So that's not something to concern. The other thing too is that the gas wasn't associated with water flow. It was just the gas coming up to surface naturally. So all of those were incredibly relieving and comforting. And then with the flow rates, then we were getting up to that sort of in excess of 800,000 cubic feet per day. Now with that one, coupled with the high concentration of helium, it really puts it as one of the top helium wells that have been drilled. So, there's some people out there saying, well, we've obviously seen higher flow rates elsewhere. But as I say, that's one piece of the puzzle. The other one is the concentration of the helium. It's fine having all the flow in the world, but if you've got less than 1% helium, then that's an awful lot of gas that you need to process. So having high concentration helium really has a lot of advantages. The amount of overall gas in place that you need to find to have a potentially viable economic discovery is less. And then the other thing is the amount of processing that needs to occur. The amount of gas that needs to be processed in a plant is obviously less if it's higher concentration, and that may well have benefits for the cost of production as well. So all of that extremely pleased with. And also it's probably worth mentioning too, it's not a particularly deep hole compared to other helium holes that are being drilled. So with it, we have certainly, we really replicated that original discovery. We now have all the confidence in the world to move forward, and a very much a likely program is to extend the drill hole later this year and go through the entire depth of the zone of interest, which will be picked up with the seismic. And for anyone interested, they can see that seismic profile in our presentations and our website. So that largely remains untested. So, with greater depth, there's certainly the possibility that pressure and flow rate, therefore, could also increase. So just a tip of the iceberg with this one, but as the first ever dedicated helium well in a new province, I mean, it's such a great result. So it really gives us the motivation to move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a phenomenal place to be starting off with, especially the concentrations that you mentioned. Just to wrap up, when we're looking ahead, what is the pathway for Pulsar to become, a junior producer and turn this from an exploration story into a production story?
Certainly. So the next one is all the data that we've literally just acquired. So we're now giving that off to a resource estimator that we use. It's a group called Sproul, who's really one of the top engineering firms for this type of work. The anticipation is that we should then get their resource calculation with any luck sometime in July. So it's not very long to wait. And that will then answer the next critical one. So there's concentration, there's flow, the next one is volume. And that's really where we're going to have some, there's going to be a big moment for the company. There's an announcement that we just put out today saying that the replenishment of the reservoir after shutting in was quite quick in terms of the pressure build-up. So that gives a certain level of confidence that it's not just a small pocket that we're looking at, that there's a bit of gas there for it to build up so quickly. So really excited about what Sproul's going to come up with. So that's a big one there. And then after that, really, then the company starts to pivot. I guess it's really not so much exploration anymore because the discovery's been made. It's now, okay, what does development look like? And so I mentioned earlier that, potentially drilling deeper with the hole that we've just drilled, extending its depth. I think that to me is a very logical thing to do. The other thing is a couple of step-out wells. And so the absolute location of those will be defined after Sproul's conducted their work, but likely to be fairly close to the hole that we've already drilled, so that we have that sort of small field of wells there. In the meantime, proceed with a preliminary economic assessment, a PEA, so we can start to talk about what do the economics look like. And then behind the scenes already, we've started things like, okay, a key consumable for production is electricity. So we've already started looking into that quite deeply about, how do we hook into the local grid power? And then in terms of then plant design and fabrication. So for us, the prize is liquid helium. We certainly strive to get towards that point because that's where the most value is. But those do take a little bit of time to fabricate, roughly 18 months for a liquid helium plant is what it appears at the moment. So we like the thought of aiming for that certainly, but in the meantime, see if we could potentially get helium in a gas form going, which has got a less sort of fabrication time frame associated to it. So all of these things and then some other bits like 3D seismic and so on, so they can really fine-tune the resource. It's all about reducing the risk profile and then start to have some discussions with, potentially with off-takers as soon as we get to that point where we feel that it's comfortable, that it's certainly, after that resource has come out potentially, have those off-take discussions. So, it's very busy and it's all happened rather quickly, but, wonderful opportunity.
Well, certainly sounds like it's going to be a busy period ahead for Pulsar. Tom, thank you so much for chatting with us today. Great to see you and looking forward to hearing more updates shortly.
Thanks very much for having me, James.